IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy episode. Today we're actually going to talk about sports, and not just about the recent sports developments, but going a little bit on the flashback mode. So all of us are tuned into sports with more of here and now updates, catching up on the newspaper scores for IPL or who won the tennis match. But my colleague Malathi is with me here today, and she's been a sports enthusiast and looking at sports policy as an area of interest that she kinds of thrives in. So here's a quick flashback view that she wants to take us through, especially about the sports policy in India. Welcome to the All Things Policy podcast once again, Malathi. So let's hear it from you.
Yeah, thanks, Sowmya. Thanks. So I'd like to first give all of us an overview of India's sports policy journey. Right. So sports is not new to India. I mean, it's from the Vedic times that we've been participating in things like archery, wrestling. All these sports have been a part of Indian space. I'll start off from post-independence. So from 1947, and so immediately after independence, not much was done. It's only in 1951 that the first Asiad Games was held in New Delhi. And during that time, we didn't really have any sports body as such. This was the first games that was held, and India did fairly well as the host nation. But there was nothing really devoted towards, ensuring that sports is on the mainstream. So it was only in 1954 that the All India Council of Sports was created, and this essentially the focus here was to promote sports in the country. So the role of the AICS was predominantly to advise the government on issues such as the national sports policy, the funding of national sports federations, the NSFs, which we have 61 of at this point in time, and of course providing coaching for elite athletes. When I say elite, it's more for athletes who are participating at the national and the international level. So this happened in 1954. Now, there's a lull of 28 years, close to 3 decades before anything was done regarding sports. It was only in 1982 that, and this is again when the Asian Games was hosted in New Delhi, and that was during Indira Gandhi's time, that a sports department was created at the union level. It was known by a different name then. Currently, it's known as the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. And the first act of the MYAS was to introduce India's first national sports policy. So the NSP came into effect then. And it was around the same time that SAI, which we all know because it's all over India, the Sports Authority of India, was launched. Primary focus of SAI was to develop coaches and physical education teachers to kind of grow participation in sport and physical activity, throughout India. And of course, to enhance the sporting infrastructure, which we didn't really have much of. Okay, just a point here is that 1982 in the Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium was built specifically for it. It was the first stadium that was built with that sort of infrastructure, as a multi-event setup. So again, between 1982 and 1984 is when things started kind of falling into place with respect to having a national sports policy. The first one, which happened around that time, as well as SAI, which is a Sports Authority of India, starting to kind of make inroads. But then, unfortunately, it took another 17 years before anything substantial could be done on the policy scene in India. Between 86 and 2001, there's again a 17-year period when other sporting ecosystems in many other nations sort of updated their policies, made it more relevant. And you'll notice that there was also sort of an uptick in terms of nations, of even small nations participating in sports and kind of making the news. It could be Jamaica, which is a very small nation. Economically, they're not very sound, but they're known for their athletic competency. So some nations really kind of made those inroads because of the changes that they did in their sports policy and the sports culture in general. Okay, but India, we didn't see much till again 2001. And 2001 is when the national sports policy was updated. And the focus here of the NSP was, if you notice, from the initial stage of 1954, where focus was more for elite athletes and then, advising the government on national sports policies, 2001, the focus became more for mass participation in sport. So essentially, mass participation was to be led by the union government, and the excellence at the elite level was a combination of both the union as well as the state. So that was kind of how it was envisioned. And SAI was then collaborating with the Indian Olympic Association and NSFs, and these are the national sports federations. Each sport has its own NSF, which is an autonomous body, and this was kind of envisioned and started in 2001. And NSFs were to promote the elite sport excellence at this point in time. So 2001 is when we started seeing significant changes happening in the national sports policy. Unfortunately, again, there was a bit of a lull, but this time it was around 10 years. But during that time, there was some progress being made, but it was in 2011 that the Manmohan Singh led government introduced the National Sports Development Code, the NSDC. This was to, again, if you notice now, the spectrum of what the code or the policy entails is much larger now, and it's also more nuanced in the sense that they're focusing on promoting active lifestyle, child and youth development, social inclusiveness, improving employment opportunities. They're looking at also peace and development through sports, and of course the national pride, the belongingness and the national pride that comes with it. So these were the focus areas in 2011, and before we moved into 2014 when the national youth policy came into effect. And again, it's if you notice, the focus is more on youth because India is a very young nation. We have predominantly, a huge chunk of the majority of our population is below 35 years. So at this point in time, even that the government realized that fitness involving youth for social inclusiveness and other things was very important, and also to help with the, employment opportunities also. Right? So this happened in 2014. It was at the same time that a number of schemes were launched. So we had something called the Target Olympic Podium Scheme, TOPS. It was launched at the same time, which was actually focusing on athletes specifically to ensure that they kind of, the elite sports that they're kind of representing at the international level, they are funded, they're given the proper support, like coaches and nutrition and other things, and that the focus for them will be just to kind of ensure that they can be in the top 3 the Olympic level. And you'll have noticed it was during that time, Sowmya, that many India kind of made its sort of presence felt, right, at the international scene as well. Of course, a number of other schemes like in the Khelo India, which many of us hear of. Khelo India also has its own different schemes at the school level, the youth, as well as the university games. So you'll see a lot of that happening, and that has been happening over the last 5-6 years. But the only thing here was that the policy has not been adopted at different NSFs because of the National Code of Good Governance in Sports, which was introduced later in 2017, at the time when the Khelo India scheme came into effect. This was essentially to bring in universal principles of good governance, ethics, and have certain norms set, right, to kind of weed out all these issues that we're having.
Right.
But this didn't see the light of day, unfortunately, and is because of the legal loopholes that were kind of utilized by many of the NSFs. Because as you know now, politicians, have unfortunately made inroads, and they're leading many of these bodies. They don't have the subject matter expertise, but they're there. They're there to lead, and that's kind of contributing to a lot in terms of the poor governance, in terms of corruption and other things. And the NCGGS, that is the National Code of Good Governance in Sports, can be implemented. I'm sure many of these notable, lacunas that we have can be easily, overcome.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Malathi. That was like a quick view. Yeah, I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm Sowmya and I had corporate affairs at Takshashila. But this was more to give a context to people that I'm more a sport enthusiast in the context of fitness, and Malathi has been into the sports policy arena now. So thanks for giving us deeper insights about the role of the National Sports Federation. And of course, there's a huge lull and high that we have gone through, right, from 47 till now. But interesting to see how youth policy and the schemes and the Khelo India have kind of come over time. And I think the most pressing need for us to kind of focus on now is the National Code for Good Governance in Sports, right? I think that's the one that's lacking, and that's why we see the turmoil that we are in today. So, Malathi, just to understand in the global context, right, where do you see India's place in the world, especially in the context of sports? And, of course, we'll get into the barriers and more of what would enable us to get there. But give us a fair idea about where are we on that front.
Yeah, so India, I'll just give a snapshot of where India is in terms of, its place in the world. Now, as you know, unfortunately, we recently have the distinction of being the most populous nation, close to 1.4 billion. We do have we are the seventh largest country in terms of landmass. And as mentioned, the youthful workforce that we have, or the youth demographics, large percentage of the population is below 35 years. Right? From the cultural side, we are, do have the characterized by a very diverse. I mean, diversity in terms of religion, culture, language, ethnicity. Why I'm mentioning all this is it makes India unique in many ways, but it also poses a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to implementing policies. Right? I mean, recent past we have there's some economic growth that we've noticed, and of course on the technology we are thriving as a technology sector. It's recognized as a global hub for IT services and software development and innovation. So that's something that we should really bank on in terms of spreading the word, in terms of ensuring that even sports and other things can reach the masses. Right? Technology is something which we really have a kind of advantage. Of course, being one of the largest the democracy, that we have a good democratic framework that allows us for regular elections. There is a robust judiciary as well as free press. So these are things, again, why I'm highlighting is that we can use this to our advantage rather than having the media or the social media or press kind of just sensationalizing certain things and not focusing on the real problems that we have at hand, right? And of course, our strategic geopolitical position is something we should not forget, and the soft power as well, right? We have an influence globally through our rich cultural heritage, art, music, and why not with sports also?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Namalti, if we have to look at what are the constraints we have, to go towards, full potential that this country has. So we know that a lot of things are in our favor, but we also probably need to look deeper into what is limiting this country, because you say a lot of youth, there is talent and smaller pockets where people excel in specific sports because just the way we are built or the kind of experience we have had, right? So it'll be useful to understand that.
Right. So one thing I missed mentioning earlier is that sports policy is actually a state subject, and it's stated in our constitution as well. Seventh schedule says that sport is listed as a state subject, which means that the state has authority in terms of spelling the rules and how things jurisdiction wise as well. The union has been sort of playing a role in this, but we should keep in mind that as mentioned earlier, right, because we're so diverse in terms of our culture and ethnicity, we need to keep in mind that each state has its own share of problems, right, economically and otherwise. I know that as a country and even as different states, our focus would be in different areas. Priority would be kind of to ensure that there's enough jobs. So employment is a priority for each state. Healthcare, removing poverty, ensuring that we are moving up in the socio-economic. So all these things are obviously will be the primary focus of governments, right? But sports can be that, can really help us overcome many of these social barriers that are there. And some of the hurdles that we see significantly from a social angle is things like stereotyping, the cultural taboos, about what only certain sports only women can expected to perform. Like, if you look at wrestling or boxing, it's predominantly known as a male sport, right? But then in the recent past, we have had many women kind of come to prominence, Mary Kom being one classic example. Socially, again, the hurdles typically that we have are athlete safety, and safety is now with respect to many aspects. We have recently seen the sexual harassment cases in the WFI, which is still kind of being dragged despite many months since it was first brought up. There's gender bias, there's poverty, which kind of is a deterrent. Are we as a country also giving importance to sports as a community, right? Is it something that we really want? Because as society, if we demand that sports from a fitness angle, that it can remove barriers, it's kind of becomes part of our daily lives, then the governments and the markets will definitely respond. We're seeing the markets responding in many ways, and I'll come to that in the enablers. But we need to keep that in mind also from a hurdles perspective. A couple of other things, if I club it under governance, which everybody knows, this poor governance. We have an outdated sports policy. The states are not doing much, except a few, like Odisha is a fine example where, they've really kind of not just funded, but they've also, prioritized sports, right? But poor administration, corruption, nepotism, poor accountability, and politicians occupying positions of authority. I think this has kind of been where we have suffered, and where the government should not get involved. You should leave it to the subject matter experts, former sports persons, maybe have the proper checks and balances in place to ensure that things are being conducted and there's no financial irregularities. We saw classic examples where at the Commonwealth Games that was held, that India hosted a few years ago, that it was riddled with all of this. And it became an internationally known that, and that's one of the reasons why India is not given multi-sport events, because they see that they're not able to manage it with all these issues that they have. Right? And of course, from a resource capacity perspective, we're looking at insufficient funding at the state level. The only few states who have really prioritized sports. There's poor infrastructure at the grassroots and for elite level sports development. There's poor R&D. We just have one, you won't believe it, Sowmya, there's just one national level center, where there's for research and other things in Patiala, which is focusing on R&D. We might have more in the coming years, but currently that's another area which has not been given much prominence. Right? And of course, the information constraint. Many people don't even know about these schemes. They're not aware of the data that's out there and the schemes that they could possibly opt for. Right? So that's, I think, awareness as well at the citizen level, as in that for the society, is also important.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
I think as much as this seems like a dull moment in this conversation, because there is so much that we need to catch up on,
Right.
but Malathi, also tell more about, I do see the potential, because just surrounded with a lot of youngsters. I was actually talking to this youngster who said she wants to do sports physiotherapy. And I was like, okay, do you see a future? And she says, yeah, a lot of people, whether they're into hardcore sports or not, they're enthusiastic about ensuring they prevent themselves from injury, or when they have an injury, they want to kind of be sure how much recovery time has to be given, or it just curious in keeping a lifestyle of fitness. And I feel the markets have also grown a lot in the perspective of having products, which creates a huge market, right? So a decathlon kind of space, which has given access to sports equipment like never before, right? I mean, anybody can go there and it's still reasonably priced, and then a lot of things happen within that environment. So we see that the market to a large extent is coping, and youngsters are looking at careers. So do you see enough of enablers coming away, even in terms of sports, be it individuals or corporates or non-profits, whatever that could be? So it'd be nice to hear from.
Yeah, Sowmya, I'm an optimist at heart. So I always would like to see the brighter side. So you would notice that the last decade or so, there has definitely been a significant, improvement in terms of visibility of sports, right? And it's happened because many of us sports persons at the international level have kind of gotten that recognition. But it's also because the markets have opened up. If you notice, like you mentioned, the decathlons, right? You're kind of spoiled for choice in terms of the kind of equipment that you could get, and across different sports. Earlier, you had to go to a sports store, and predominantly cricket and maybe football and a few other equipment would have been available, and not of good quality as well, right? You need to really source it from elsewhere. But that has opened up. And I think the key enablers in the recent past, I broadly categorize it into the commercial sports sector and the not-for-profit sector, is sort of seeing the light of day, I would say. I think what has been good are the sporting leagues that have come up in India. IPL itself, I think, has been around since for more than 12 years now. Has is a fine example. In fact, their business model has kind of been acknowledged even at the international level. They've done well over the time to iron out the kinks. We have other such leagues, like you have the Indian Super League for football, Pro Kabaddi League. All these have kind of stemmed out of after the IPL started, right? All the other sports also started developing, having their own leagues. Of course, they're still not there in terms of how IPL has conducted itself, but definitely it is for the better, because when you have these franchises and league promoters, right, investing in grassroots infrastructure, training, and also kind of talent scouting, it augurs for better days for India as well, right? So that's one thing that we're seeing. We should also keep in mind that CSR, which is the corporate social responsibility, we have certain organizations contributing to that, and that actually contributes to the National Sports Fund. So just FYI, it's more of the CSR funding goes to the National Sports Fund, and that in turn is part of the sports budget that's announced at the union level, and that funds the SAI, the NSF, which are the different sporting bodies, if they kind of opt for it, right? So that's where the NSRs contributed, the NSDF. And what's been the key enabler though in the commercial sector are the public-private partnerships. And this is actually where I would think we should sort of be heading even at the state level. States should start thinking of how it can be a win-win for the government, for the private sectors, and ensure that it's the community benefits overall as a result, right? So a fine example is Jindal Steelworks. They collaborated with SAI as part of their corporate social responsibility, and the initiative is to oversee the upgrading and the maintenance of infrastructure at SAI's regional training center, for example, in Jamshedpur or in other areas, right? And they have also contributed immensely to Odisha's sporting model. So I'll just give that as an example where it's a unique partnership between the federations, the corporates, the sports persons, and with a common vision of achieving sports excellence. And this was back in 2013 when it was first envisioned. And over the last decade, it's now 10 years, and the state has brought, like in the Indian Hockey League, they have the Kalinga Lancers that the state has actually brought. It started back then in 2013. And later an MOU was signed with leading corporate houses to bring the new model of high performance centers. So we have the Kalinga Stadium in Bhubaneswar, which is a multi-sport facility. And Odisha has many such now that they plan or they've already opened across their state. And they've also organized many national and international world-class events, across multiple disciplines. Not just hockey, but in swimming, athletics, football, wrestling. And the key success factor for them has been the PPP. The public-private partnership. So all these high-performance centers, they operate on a PPP basis. So you have Tata, Jindal Steelworks, and Reliance. They are the key players. And they do the talent scouting of players and coaches. So they kind of conduct these tournaments across without the government's interference to ensure that we don't bring in the political thing. So that's avoided. And then they pick up players. And then the state provides the facilities. So infrastructure is provided by the state. Whereas the corporates are the ones that cover costs for the player accommodation, everything, from the onboarding of the coaches, the nutrition, everything is taken care of by the corporates. Wow. So, and then you have sports, people, former sports players who are kind of playing the role of the coach and kind of ensuring that they're getting the best in terms of coaching methodologies and other things, right? So this has been a win-win because each one who's an expert in their respective areas is getting involved, right? It's not the government getting involved in everything and then, making a mess of it. So this has been a very successful model, and Odisha has done it really well. And they've also increased their funding. The state budget itself recently, 1,200 odd crores was the sports budget for the year. So that's Odisha is, I think, is a fine example. But then again, we need to remember that each state has its own challenges, and which is why at a state level is where the decisions have to be made in terms of the policy making. Yeah, that would be a suggestion that I have.
Okay. Great. I think we've come a full circle, Malathi. We went through, where it all began to how things are thriving today. And I completely agree with, identifying talent. We have more sorts of tournaments or even kabaddi for that matter. I think just because these things came to the forefront, children are now more curious about learning the game itself or even playing as a casual sport, right? And the PPP model, I think, is great for anything, heritage, sports. A lot of these things work while state has some capacity to do what is crucial, but then you have other players coming in with the money and other instruments in it, right? And like you said, in smaller pockets, I think still things are happening. Of course, Joy Bhattacharya on the football front, on the northeastern side, just giving a ball to a child made a huge difference to that community, and everybody is out there playing, right? And I've also heard that in the Koot community, a couple of friends who are very passionate about hockey, it happens more like a thing within the families, and it's taken with too much seriousness, and there is an infrastructure, and there's so much energy in the whole thing coming together.
In fact, when I was in school, Sowmya, I studied in a Bishop Cotton Girls' School, and there a lot of people are from Coorg. And so hockey, that's when I kind of really started my hockey career, went on to represent Karnataka, right? At that point, many of these fellow players, right, were from Coorg, and they're natural.
Yes.
When it comes to, they
Absolutely.
take to hockey like, duck to the water kind of thing. So it's nice to see that the sporting culture is so vibrant in that community.
Yes.
And we have many such also all over India for different sports. Right?
Yeah. And I'm like more amazed by the thing that, they will let go of anything. Like I've had friends who've been in the corporate life and all, they'll be like, this window, we are doing this particular thing. So it's taken very seriously. And I like what comes with it, right? Like you ensure that you put aside everything else, you plan your schedule. So
you prioritize. It becomes part of your
exactly
day-to-day
so
life too.
I think that's good. And of course, schools also are introducing a sports environment more seriously. And I think even a lot of parents will consider a school with a playground than being compromised by it. Right? So I think overall we're heading in the right direction. And it's been a lovely conversation with you, Malathi. I think we can do more about looking at the various layers that we've actually missed talking about today. But we will kind of come back with more episodes on this front, and we will dwell deeper into the context of sports policy. And I think there is active citizenship that's required, right? As much as we say the government and all of that, we need to play a role as well. I think you'll have more to say on that front. So I look forward to that, and look at the economic side of it also, more on the budget. So thanks, Malathi, for your time. And I think for the rest, you can listen to this All Things Policy episode available on the IVM Podcast Network.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
You.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sowmya. Bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.